On 13. So this is interesting. The Lord's wrath was kindled against Moses. Says Rashi. I'm going to quote Rashi, probably in their art scroll as well. Yeah. So you have it in the art scroll itself. You want to see the words of the art scroll, the way they change it, the way they rewrite it in number 14, beneath the line, page 309. But I'll read it from Rashi as follows. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, in every instance that God's kindling anger is mentioned, i.e., that God's anger was sparked in the Torah, it is stated that there was a consequence, i.e., it was followed by a punishment. In other words, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, if you look through the Bible, you will see that whenever it says God's wrath flared, there's a negative consequence, there's a punishment. So if that's the case, if that's the pattern, then what was the punishment here to Moshe? You have to assume Moshe was punished because it says God's wrath flared up. Now remember, what he may be addressing is, as Maimonides teaches us, that God does not have any human emotion. So what does it mean that God's wrath flared up? God doesn't get angry like a human being gets angry. Anger is a weakness. God doesn't get angry in that same way. So obviously it's a metaphor. What is it a metaphor to? Like, what is it indicating? So I think that's what's at stake here. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says it doesn't mean God is angered, because God doesn't have emotions like the human being. It means that just like when a human being is angry, there's a negative result. When the verse says that God is angry, there's a consequence. So I think what's at stake is he's trying to explain that the words Vayicharaf Hashem, God's wrath flares up. It's not the only time it says it in the Torah, but wherever it says it, there's a consequence. So the assumption is that there's a consequence here. Go ahead.
Could you translate the first two words for Yaakov? What does af mean?
So literally, af. So af is although, but af literally is the nose, nostrils.
What?
Nostrils, the nose. And the
is
idea
that
is
name, or is that yours?
no, Osnaim is ears. And the idea is that when someone's angry, if you see it even in the cartoons, what happens when someone's angry in the cartoons? There's steam coming out of his nose and ears, but also this, right? Also, no, so that's what it says. So it's like when someone's angry, there's steam coming out of the nose. So Vayichar up is that Rashi says that, I don't remember where he says that, but he says that elsewhere, that word, that's the imagery, that the smoke is coming out of the nose, and that's when someone is angry. Vayichar charon. What does vayichar mean? Af is nostrils, and vayichar means sort of like flaring up. So I have to check what's the etymology. Vayichar charon. Shall we say it in the Shema? Yeah, I have to check the exact etymology of that word. But in any case, God is angered. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, whenever God is angry, there's a consequence. I think maybe not, but I think that it's part of the problem here is, what does it mean God is angry? We know that God doesn't get angry. That when it says God is Ham. So that's why Maimonides teaches that these are all metaphors, because God himself is unchanged. So when you say he's angry, it means that there's a negative consequence. So now let's see, what's the negative consequence? When you look here, you don't really see a negative consequence, but there is a negative consequence. But you have to see, you have to look subtly. What does Rashi say? This is fascinating. In this instance, however, no consequence is stated, and we do not find that a punishment came to Moses after the kindling of anger. So it seems like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha is raising a question. We have a problem all over the Torah. When it says God is angry, God's wrath flares up, there's a consequence, and that may be the meaning of God flares up. Here, the pattern is broken. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, I don't know. I don't know what to do. Rabbi Yossi says to him, Rabbi Yossi said to him, here too you can see a consequence. And this is fascinating. This teaches you how to read the Torah. It's very subtle. You have to pay attention to all the subtleties. Is stated. Here too a consequence is stated. Namely in the question, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? Now, is Aaron a Levite? Or is Aaron a priest? We know Aaron is a priest. Yes, of course, technically he's from Shevet Levi, he's from the tribe of Levi. But we know Aaron as Aaron the Kohen. Aaron was selected to be the priest. So why specifically here, the only place in the Torah, is Aaron referred to Aaron the Levite? Now, the answer is Aaron wasn't selected as a priest yet, because the priests were only selected as a result of the golden calf, because there was supposed to be the Bechorim, the firstborn, was supposed to serve in the temple. Only when they made the golden calf and the firstborn also succumbed, only the tribe of Levi did, and so the tribe of Levi was selected, and from the tribe of Levi it was Aaron. So this happens later, but nevertheless, this is the only place in the Torah where the Torah refers to Aaron the Levite. If I go to the Hebrew school and I say Aaron no one's going to tell me the Levite. They're going to say the priest. So why does it say here Aaron the Levite? Says Rabbi Yossi, he was supposed to be a Levite. Who was supposed to be the Kohen? Moshe. But because Moshe doesn't want to take the job of taking the Jews out of Egypt, so he loses the job of the priests. And the priesthood was now taken from Moshe, who should have had it, and it was given to Aaron, who up to that point was the Levite. So that the Torah, you see, the Torah uses one word. Hello, Aaron, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? The Torah inserts the word Levite here to indicate that there is a punishment, right? That's what Rabbi Yossi says. This is very clever. So he says, here too you can see a consequence stated, namely in the question, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite, who was destined to be a Levite and not a priest, a Kohen? I had said that the priesthood would emanate from you. Henceforth, it will not be so, but he, Aaron, will be the priest and you, the Levite. As it is said, but as for Moses, the man of God, his sons were to be called in the tribe of Levi, from Chronicles 1, chapter 23. So this is from Zevachim, from the Talmud. So this is fascinating. That the word Halevi, the Levite, indicates that Aaron was supposed to be the Levite, and now it was taken from Moshe, given to Aaron. Now, by the way, if you look at yesterday's parsha, there's many points in yesterday's parsha that relate to what's happening here. But just to say one, there's 7 days of inauguration where they perform the service in the temple before the official opening day. Right? It's like when you open a store in Greenwich Avenue, what do they have? The soft opening. They have the pre-grand opening. There they perform all the service. Who does the service? Moshe. People don't know this. Moshe performed the service in the temple. And nothing happens. The divine presence doesn't dwell. Only on the 8th day, when Aaron does the service, then the fire comes down, then the divine presence dwells. So it's interesting how Moshe, in the beginning, Moshe does the service. He was supposed to do the service, but now it's passed on to Aaron. So that's one point where this reading connects to yesterday's reading. But the other points too, maybe we'll get to them. But the bottom line is that's what I think is so beautiful is that it's alluded to in the one word. And Halevi, and it's saying he used to. Halevi, the Levite, means he was supposed to be the Levite. But from this point on, he's a Kohen. So there's a lot more to say, but let's take Vicky's question, and we'll see from there. Go ahead, Vicky.
Thank you, Rabbi. My question is about Moses. Did he know that? I mean, how he's supposed to know that Aaron will be helping him? I know he's a prophet, but the Hashem gives him the prophecy ability to be a prophet, but to a certain extent. So how can he be angry at him for not knowing that Aaron's supposed to help him?
So we talked about this a little bit 2 weeks ago. And again, there's 2 ways to read the verse. You could read the verse that, don't you know Aaron's going to help you? You can also know, and there's another, remember, last week, we talked about it last time, so I don't want to reopen the whole thing, but in generally speaking, there's 2 ways of reading the story. One way of reading the story is that Aaron was always supposed to help Moshe. And then your question is a valid question. How come Moshe, how is Moshe supposed to know that? So then we have to address that question. But remember, there's also another whole possibility. The other possibility is that Aaron was not supposed to help Moshe. Moshe was supposed to do it alone. And the reason why Aaron is selected, and according to some commentaries, that's not the best option. It's only second to best. It's not the preferred way, is because Moshe doesn't want to go. So if Moshe would want to go, he wouldn't need Aaron. But now let's go back. So according to that genre of interpretation, your question doesn't that question doesn't stand. But even according to the say, Moshe should have known. So if God tells you to do something, so there's a technical objection. The technical objection is, how am I going to do it? So the answer is say yes, and then ask God, how am I going to do it? Well, say you have Aaron. But somebody who keeps saying, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, is not even accepting the mission, right? There's 2 ways to do it. The first thing is, I'll take the job, and then we'll sit down and we'll figure out how we're going to get the job done. So that would be legitimate. If Moshe would say, God, okay, I'll do the job, but I have a problem. What's the problem? The problem is, how am I going to speak? Moshe, if Aaron doesn't hear me. Okay, so then we'll figure it out. But Moshe, because of his perceived limitation, which we talked about this a few weeks ago, maybe that's in fact the reason why he was selected, but that's another story. So he's saying anybody is better than me. He's not willing to accept the job. So we're not even at the point where knowing that Aaron's there is going to help, because sometimes somebody takes. Okay, let me give you an example. Example is someone goes on a date and he comes back and he doesn't want to go on another date. Why not? So one problem is he doesn't want to marry this woman. But one problem is he doesn't want to get married, right? So he doesn't want the job to begin with. It's not about this objection, that objection. He doesn't want the job. So the objections are being used for because he doesn't want the job. So from the way God sees it, and certainly at this point, after all these objections, Moshe is saying, I don't want to do it. And the objection is not a technical objection. Sometimes I say, I'll accept the job. Tell me how to do it. Okay, you'll hire someone to help. Whatever you can't do, you'll hire someone. Can't do everything, hire someone, you'll outsource, whatever the case is. But that's not what Moshe is doing here. Here Moshe is saying, I can't do it because I'm not capable.
Yes, and so that's why he replies that about Aaron after he said anybody can do it. So that's just too much, right?
It's too much, right? It's like anyone can do it. It means you're out of touch, means you don't want the job. If you wanted the job and you had to know how to do it, we'll teach you how to do it. We'll get you training. We'll hire a consultant. There's all kinds of solutions, but you don't want the job. So if he doesn't want the job, God is angry. Okay, let's circle back to that piece of Talmud. What does it mean God is angry? It seems like, a punishment has to be related. It has to be a consequence. The consequence has to be related. It's not just punishing. It's a result of the sin. So here, if you think about it, this I got from the Gur Aryeh. Gur Aryeh is the Maharal of Prague, 16th century sage, and he's also a little bit of a Kabbalist, but he's a great philosopher and prolific writer. He's known for creating the golem. If that's a reality or not reality is another story. But in any case, a very prominent rabbi, and he wrote many books, but also he wrote a commentary on Rashi. So we're reading through it. We have the Bible, we have the Torah, we have the Rashi, and then we have his book Gur Aryeh, which is a commentary on Rashi. So he says very interesting. He says, what's the connection between Moshe not wanting to go to Egypt and losing the priesthood? Seems like arbitrary. Because you don't want to do what I want, so I'll take something else away from you. What's going on? But the Gur Aryeh says, the Maharal says as follows. He says, no, it's very much related. What is a priest? The priest is a servant. It's not a position of prominence or power or per se. It's a position of service. When you're a priest, you're serving the people. So if you don't want to serve the people in Egypt, then you're not going to be able to serve the people when it is convenient for you, right? Who should be the public servants? The person who says, "Oh, I'm going to serve the people when it's comfortable," or the person who is ready to do whatever the people need. So because Moshe is not willing to be the public servant, so then he can't be the priest, because the priest is the public servant. So you can't just select, you can't pick and choose when you want to be the public servant. The proper public servant is one who steps up when the need is there, not necessarily when he's ready and when he's able and it's convenient for him. As opposed to Aaron. Aaron is ready to show up. So therefore, he's the appropriate guy to be the priest. So according to this interpretation, it's not arbitrary. It's not, oh, Moshe didn't want to go, so we're going to take away the priesthood just to punish him. No, it's not a punishment. This is related to the concept of what a priest is, what a public servant is. You're not a public servant if you show up when it's convenient. That's not what a public servant is. So that's what the Gur Aryeh adds to Rashi. Or Rashi is really quoting the Talmud, but it's another layer. So we have the verse, we have the Talmudic commentary, and we have the philosophical point that explains the Talmudic commentary. So that's 3 layers. And then we have a 4th layer from Ben. Go ahead, Ben. 4th layer.
The 4th layer. So you said that Moshe's turning that down or saying that a sin? That I heard you just say that.
Well, sin is that tricky word. We'll talk about sin, but go ahead. Let's assume sin. Go ahead.
So if it's a sin, because then it's a punishment, because then he's being punished, because of it. But then you said, well, maybe it's not a sin. Maybe it's just he's not taking it on. So I guess the question is sort of which is it? Or of course,
we have to define the terms. So it's interesting that let's go back to Rashi. I'll show it's very interesting that you pointed out. You see, we just speak because we're used to saying sin, and we're speaking in different languages, and English and Hebrew don't always have the same connotations. But it's very interesting when you look at the Rashi that we saw before from the Talmud. Rashi's quoting the Talmud. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, in every instance that God's kindling anger is mentioned, i.e., that God's anger was sparked in the Torah, it is stated that there was a consequence. Okay, this is not a good translation. You ready for the Hebrew translation? Oseh roshem, which means it makes a mark. And here there was no mark. Much more subtle than punishment or even consequence. Because whenever God's wrath is flared up, there is a mark. Meaning there is in a way, a mark is a side effect, right? If you're gonna do something on this piece of paper, if you're gonna put a piece of cheese on the paper, it's gonna make a mark, right? It's a side effect. So a mark is a natural consequence, a natural outgrowth of what's happening on this piece of paper. So here too, it's not, I take this back. It's not, certainly not punishment, but even sin, we have to define what sin is. Sin in Hebrew and sin in English is a different word. I don't know what sin in English is, what the etymology is, but in Hebrew, the most common word for chet is basically missing the mark. The same word for sin is used very commonly in the Torah for somebody like archers who would, shoot the arrow, and if they miss the mark or not miss the mark, if you miss the mark, it's chet. So chet is, what is a sin? A sin is when you're off the mark from your purpose, from your potential, right? So it doesn't have that negative connotation of what we would think of. What is sin? Oh, this terrible person. No, you're just a little bit off the mark, and the mark. So what you could be doing is something good. Maybe you're humble. Maybe Moshe is a great guy. He'd rather sit in his tent and study Talmud. It's all good, but you're off the mark. You're off what has to be done right now. You're not robbing banks necessarily, but you're not aligned with the will of God. You're not aligned with your purpose. So really the opposite of sin is alignment. By the way, in Hebrew, when you do a mitzvah, or when you pray, it has to be with kavana. Kavana is intention. But kavana really means lechaven is to align, is to aim, aim is to align. So to be aligned with God, to be aligned with your purpose is kavana, and chet and sin is to be a little bit, even if it's just a little bit off the mark, right? So you could be a great man, you could be Moses, you're not doing anything wrong, you're not robbing banks, but you're not creating any Ponzi schemes, but you don't want to go to Egypt exactly right now, which is what God wants of you, and what is your purpose? Then that's quote unquote not a sin, but that's the Hebrew word, which unfortunately, because of the weakness of English or Western languages influenced by other cultures, we don't have a word for we translate it as sin, but we really mean off the mark.
So it's another instance of the Christian concepts
So. Yes.
kind of coming in here as opposed to
influencing the way we think, right? Because the words define the connotations, right?
right.
In Hebrew, chet is much softer. It's basically off the mark.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Neil.
See, in the absence of this door.
Yes.
I couldn't hear you so well. Can we ask the people not to come into the coffee?
Yeah.
room?
Let me see what's going on. Yeah.
And maybe.
Can you just one
closed
second?
or restore the door.
Yes. Next time, next week, we'll restore the door.
Why did he say the door was new?
I didn't catch that.
Okay. Let's see what happens. Let's see how long that lasts. Yeah, it's I didn't realize he moved it until this morning when you need it. But God willing, next week we'll have the doors in their proper places, because now it's a sin. It's a sin means it's off the mark. It's a great door. It's a wonderful door. It's just a line. Yeah.
Or my inability to hear properly.
Maybe we'll sit here. Maybe it'll be less distracting. No, I'm serious. Maybe we'll sit on this side. It'll be less distracting. Go ahead, Dr. John, please.
Rabbi, it's a different kind of question, but one that's lingered with me for a while. You talk about various commentators throughout the centuries. They often lived in different countries. They often lived far distance away. How was the information written down? How was it, and how was it transmitted so that it was integrated? I mean, now we live in a world where everything is easily transportable throughout the world. And before that, we still had the printing press and other things. How was this information actually transmitted from one rabbi to another and ultimately collated?
So that's fascinating. The collation happens in the printing press, so that's a little bit later. But let's talk about that for a minute. It's a very broad subject, and I'm not familiar with every detail. But what I would say is at least 2 points. First of all, it definitely took time. In other words, if you wrote a good commentary, it would take time for it to disseminate. It may disseminate in your country. Let's say if you're living in Ashkenaz, you're living in northern France and Germany, it would spread in your community, in your circles. But it would take time. It would take probably sometimes up to a few decades before it reaches other communities. Let's say in the Sephardic countries, Spain and Northern Africa. So it would take some time. How was it collated? The way it was collated is that the later rabbis usually would, not always, but in some cases, the later rabbis, not always, but in some cases, the later rabbis would quote the earlier rabbis. Best example would be Nachmanides. Nachmanides, Nachmanides is one of the most I don't know how to say this. I guess famous or used. Look, Rashi is the number one commentary. Why that is another discussion. But Rashi historically has been the number one commentary on the Bible. That's just the way it was. The next person that was probably the most famous, the most used, was Nachmanides. Nachmanides is a different style. He's much longer than Rashi and much more elaborate. Rashi is very concise. But Nachmanides, for example, who lived about 100 years after Rashi, each of his own commentaries, he starts and says, this is what Rashi interprets. This is why I agree, this is why I disagree, and this is why I give my own interpretation. So that's an example where it's collated by the later commentaries themselves. Okay, but that doesn't always happen. That happens. Some rabbis do that. Other rabbis, they see the earlier commentaries, but they have a completely different style. And somewhere throughout their commentary, they're going to say why they reject that entire genre of that other commentary, right? Like Rashi. Traditionally, Rashi is seen as the basic, simple, straightforward commentary on the Torah. He says himself, he says, I came to explain the simple meaning of the verse. But the other commentaries, even his grandson, disagreed, and they said, Rashi, you're a good guy, and you have great commentaries, but you're not in the genre of the simple meaning. You're much more influenced by the Medrash. And they said, we'll give you the simple meaning. And other people like that, Ibn Ezra, he lived in Spain, so different than Rashi was in Ashkenaz. And he says, Rashi says he's doing simple, the straightforward meaning. He says Rashi hits the simple meaning 1 in 1,000, meaning you're a great guy, but you're not doing the simple meaning. So in other words, sometimes they're quoting the earlier generation, the earlier commentary, and saying, this is why I agree, this is why I disagree. And sometimes in their commentary, they say, I'm not even going to talk about, I have a philosophical dispute with you about your whole genre of interpretation. So the short answer is that some people are quoting the earlier interpretations, but how it spread, it took some time, and it was democratic. The good commentary surfaced. People discuss certain commentaries. Now there are certain people, there's certain commentaries, there's certain instances, I think it's the Rashbam. No, I forget who it, there's certain instances is where a guy, one of the Sephardic commentaries writes, he says, I was walking in the street and I was walking on the road and I met a traveler, and the traveler gave me an interpretation, and I was amazed that I'm quoting this interpretation, right? So that was the point, the point of contact with a commentary that later we know where it comes from. It emerges from a different part of the world, but a traveler he met a traveler and he said, you meet a Jew from another community, what do you talk about? What's the stock prices? The first thing you say, where you're from, how did they read this verse? It was something related to the sale of Joseph. So it's a sort of an emotional story. So he says, how do you understand this verse? And the guy told him, and he said, oh, that's amazing. And he copied it into his commentary. But the point is, it took some time, and some of it is collated by certain rabbis quoting other commentaries. Now the scholars sit down and figure out which commentaries did did the later commentaries see, right? So we try to figure out, did Rambam see Rashi? Maybe yeah, maybe no, we're not sure. Nachmanides certainly did. He quotes him all the time. But the less famous commentaries, who saw who and how much of who and what they were exposed to. So that's a whole way of studying. So the short answer is, what's my short answer? I don't know. The short answer is that I don't know. The medium-sized answer is that it took some time, and it was geographically based. First, it's traveled in your areas, then it traveled, and the more prominent people, it traveled quicker. So like for Maimonides wrote a book, it traveled very fast. And that's got him into hot water because it was people who were a little bit removed from it, didn't understand his greatness. So they criticized his book, they burnt his book. But in other words, it depends. The short answer is it depends. But it did take time. And it first would travel, it go to your community, then it would spread. And over the centuries, some of the commentaries are directly quoting the previous commentaries, and some are addressing them implicitly, but addressing them nonetheless. So that's what I would say right now. Go ahead.
I was just thinking of maybe one of the most profound examples of dissemination would be the Rambam's letter to the Yemenis.
Yeah. But that was closer in the sense that it was more geographically closer and also culturally closer. But you had it when the guy to the perplexed came to Europe, came to Ashkenaz in France. There were big issues. There was a Rabbi Shlomo, a great sage, Rabbi Shlomo. His last name was, in Hebrew they called Minahar, which is Mount Montpelier, which is means from the mountain. And he was a great sage in Spain in France at that time, and it was very against Maimonides. And at some point they burnt the first book of Maimonides' 14 books, the book of knowledge, because they thought there were philosophical points that were inconsistent with traditional Judaism. The point is that, and Maimonides tried to communicate, but it was so hard to communicate. So there was basically a breakdown in communication to some degree. But the point I'm trying to say is that happened in his lifetime. That traveled very fast because he was so prominent and so famous.
What some rabbis have said with the Rambam in terms of his dissemination to the less learned people of things that they thought that they should be disseminating to their communities?
Yeah, there were all kinds of problems. One problem was that Maimonides said that you could read the Bible and read my book, and that's it. You don't have to read anything else.
Would the Mishnah Torah be a?
Correct. He said that in the introduction to Mishnah Torah. You could read Maimonides, you could read the Bible, read my book, and you don't need anything else. So many rabbis saw it as an attack on the Talmud. You don't need Talmud. How could you not learn Talmud? He meant you don't need the Talmud to rule, because to be able to rule, to derive a ruling from the Talmud is very difficult.
Well, everything from the Talmud comes from the Chumash.
There's a lot of oral. I mean, it's based on, but you need the oral Torah to explain, right? You have but if you don't need the Talmud, then they take it as an attack on the Talmud, and therefore they think that the book is no good. He meant to know what to do, right? It's like a guide to behavior, right? So if you want to understand why this is the law, you read the Talmud, but you don't need the Talmud to know what to do. That's what his point was. But there's a lot of points where there was a lot of suspicion because what he was doing was so radical at the time. But in a way, the fact that it spread so fast to such distant places, so there wasn't a way that the book spreads, but then the communication about the book, and he couldn't explain himself properly, right? So in a way, the fact that it spread so fast was create some of the controversy, because when it spreads slower, it takes more time. It takes more time, and then by the time it spreads, people understand it, and people understand what's happening here, and there's a track record, and they see this is a book that's okay. Sometimes slower spread is safer. When the radical idea spread very fast, then you can't, and then the interpretation and the explanation can't catch up, doesn't spread as fast. You may get into trouble.
Well, certainly somebody, if somebody is not interested in the process, they could just go through the Shulchan Aruch.
Well, now we have a Shulchan Aruch, but you only have a Shulchan Aruch because there was a Rambam. There was no Shulchan Aruch before the Rambam. Before the Rambam, there's no such thing. You want to know what to do, study the Talmud. Well, you may have to study the entire Talmud, because the Talmud says something here, but you may have to figure out how is this consistent with what it says elsewhere. And sometimes the Talmud doesn't exactly tell you what to do, just tells you 3 opinions. So there was no Shulchan Aruch. The whole genre of having a code, a simple code, is the first one to create that was Maimonides. And at that point, it was super radical. So yeah. Go ahead, Bob, please, Dr. Bob.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. To pivot back to punishment and sin for just a moment, and the day after we read that Nadav and Avihu were killed, these guys never communicated with God. We're not even clear why they were killed. You look at the two biggies, the Moshe and Aaron. I mean, you got one guy arguing with God. You've got him breaking tablets and striking rocks. The other one is acquiescing to a golden calf, and that these guys are walking among the living. Why do you think there is a different standard in punishment? Is it because they have a bigger job to do and you turn the other way?
No, I would say the opposite. No, first of all, that's going to tie into the next story in the Torah, which is a very strange story. Many people don't know the story, but it's right there, black on white. Here, God really needs Moshe really badly. He spends a whole week trying to convince him to take the job. And you know what God does as soon as he takes the job? On the way, God wants to kill him. And then you have Zipporah circumcising the son. And so it's strange. So God wants to kill Moshe too. So he's also in the crosshairs. The point is, I would say the opposite. The Talmud says the God is more exacting from the people nearest to him. In fact, that's what Moshe tells Aaron after the sons die. He says, "This is what God said: B'krovaya kadesh. I will be sanctified by those closest to me." And the Talmud explains that the God is more exacting from the people who are closer to him. And that's why Moshe can't go into the land of Israel for hitting the rock. Hitting the rock seems to be something very small. Whatever the sin is, it's so small, no one can even agree what the sin is. So if you have 10 interpretations of what the sin is, you know what that means. It means that no one knows what the sin is. It means that that it's not clear what the sin is. So I would say God is to the contrary. Why? I think the death of the sons of Aaron is an anomaly, that it's that extreme and that immediate. And I could only go with the Hasidic. I can go with two commentaries. We can either take the Hasidic commentary and say they wanted to die. That was the whole idea, that they wanted the soul to leave the body. But putting that aside, I would also say, in general, going into the Holy of Holies is a problem. And even later, we have reports that high priests, there's this whole drama where in the second temple, the high priests were not worthy to be high priests. The way you became a high priest in the second temple, for the most part, is you paid the Roman governor. And if you paid the Roman governor, he would appoint you a high priest. And then you can go into the Holy of Holies and Yom Kippur. So the Talmud says that many of those people did not make it through the year. They would go into the Holy of Holies, come out, but then they wouldn't survive the year because they went into the Holy of Holies and they weren't worthy. So I think that Aaron's sons, they go all the way in. And there's a difference between, and you have it also in the Haftorah, when Uzzah was when David was bringing the ark to the city of David, and then on the way, someone, we're not exactly sure what happened there, but someone grabbed the ark, and basically Uzzah died. So I think there's an idea that when you go very close, when you go into the intimate space, you go into the Holy of Holies, then the stakes are higher. So there's something about even in human relationships, when you're more distant to the person and you say something and they're offended, it's not so terrible. But the closer the person is to you, especially in a very intimate space, in a very intimate time, then everything is very hurtful and everything is very the stakes are much higher, is what I'm trying to say. So I would say that would be the sons of Aaron is the anomaly, and Uzzah in the Haftarah is the anomaly. Usually, the point is that the people who are strict, the people who are closest, are the people who God is most exacting from. And then why Aaron with the golden calf? So that's So everybody talk. So we could talk about that specifically. Why did he do it, and what was the consequence? Yeah. So there's a lot to talk about. But the point is, as a general rule, I would say that if you're going all the way in, if you're going to intimate space, you have to be more respectful to the person, right? Someone who invites you into their intimate space, you have to be. You're a guest. You have to do it on their terms, and that's true for human relationships as well.
No, understood. It just seems that if I were part of the Sanhedrin and had all these four people come, the two sons, Aaron and Moshe, there's no way I would consider the two sons having the greatest infractions.
Right. And that's why certainly the Kabbalistic and Hasidic commentaries don't consider them on a very high level, and they say that it wasn't really a punishment. That's what they wanted.
Yeah, but suicide is not.
That's why it's a sin. It's a sin. And we talked about this on Friday. What is a sin? It's off the mark. It's off the will of God. So every soul, in a way, we quote the ethics of the fathers, al karcha chata chai, al karcha chata meis. You live against your will, you die against your will. So which one is it? What do you want? Do you want to live or do you want to die? Right? So the answer is your soul in this world is uncomfortable. For your soul, this world is a place of confinement. It's not a place that it's naturally comfortable in, because it's not a place where godliness is evident. So it's gasping for
oxygen.
It's not gasping for oxygen. So every time there's a mitzvah, it gets some oxygen. But on the other hand, you're here. You want to be here. You die against your will because you want to be here. Why do you want to be here? Not because you want to be here, because this is the will of God. That I'm saying the soul's perspective. Of course, the body wants to be here, but the soul's perspective is, I'm not comfortable here, but I want to be. But I want to be here because God wants me to be here. But then you have both those. You have that tension. When you say you live against your will, you die against your will. Basically, you're saying there's a tension. I'd rather be elsewhere, but my beloved one, but God wants me to be here. So that's the attitude of the soul. Now the problem with the Aaron sons is they don't have. So it's a sin because they're off the mark of God's will, but not because they're terrible people, not because they were doing terrible things, trying to undermine Moshe. In fact, like I said, that's what Moshe says. Moshe says, this is what God said. I will be sanctified by those closest to me. So Moshe says to Aaron that the sons of Aaron are closest to God. And Moshe, Rashi quotes the Medrash there, the Talmud or the Medrash, I don't even remember, that now I see that they are greater than me and you. So the sons of Aaron are greater than Moshe and Aaron. So the point is, that's one genre to say, talk about that specific sin. But I also think the place is important. I think it's also very important psychologically. When somebody brings you in, you're vulnerable. When someone brings you into their private space, you have to be very sensitive. Is what I think. And that's why I think both are true, because in other words, with the sons of Aaron, you have both. You have the idea that they wanted to expire. You also have the idea that they go into the Holy of Holies. So there's no way out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. John, please.
Rabbi, is there a feeling, since you talk about the soul yearns to be out of the body and closer to God, is there a feeling that when we're asleep, the soul is closer to God, or when someone is in coma, they're closer to God?
There is the idea of sleep. The Talmud says that when a person sleeps, the soul goes back up to recharge. But from the Hasidic perspective, you're closest to God when you're aligned with God's will. And that's why the mitzvah, you're doing God's will, you're doing a good deed. You're eating matzah, you're putting on tefillin, you're giving charity. That's the place where you have intimacy with God. And that's why the soul wants to be here, because the soul cannot do that in heaven. So ironically, heaven is a place where you feel more comfortable because the entire environment is one where it's not where the existence of God is felt and is natural and is obvious. So that's the natural place for the soul, but that's not where the soul can connect to God. So in other words, ironically, the connection can only happen when you're aligned with the will of God. So for the soul would rather be awake and doing a mitzvah than asleep. Even though when the soul is asleep, the Talmud does say, if you want to say in the negative, it says death is sleep is a 60th of death. But it also says that when the soul goes, the Zohar talks about this, the soul descends when a person sleeps, his soul descends and sort of reconnects and recharges, not just biologically and physically, but also spiritually. But I would think that at least from the Kabbalistic and Hasidic perspective, the greatest alignment with the will of God, the greatest unity and intimacy is through the action, which is counterintuitive, and that's why Judaism is very different than other faiths. Judaism is so action oriented, not only because we're saying we're more practical and we're trying to have a practical impact on the world, that too, but also philosophically we say, where are you closest to God? Now, on the surface, the answer would be when you're spiritual. But the Kabbalistic answer is no, God is not spiritual versus physical. He transcends both of those definitions. Where are you closest to God? When you are aligned with God's will. And you have all the metaphors. The metaphor is the hug, the kiss. That's doing a mitzvah. So that's why we're in a little bit different business than religion. We're not really about religion in the classical sense, which is becoming spiritual, escaping the mundane. We're the opposite. We want to sanctify the mundane, and even more than that, we understand. We talked about this a lot when we did the Song of Songs. That ironically, the place of intimacy is within the physical, because that's consistent with God's will. You can also connect it to human life, where the greatest act of intimacy is the most physical act. And according to Judaism, the way you say that act, you say it's called kedusha, holiness. So the idea that when are you closer with somebody, when you're sharing a spiritual idea or when you're doing something physical? You would think the souls are more connected in the spiritual, but it's not so simple, because the highest and the lowest, the most physical and the most spiritual are connected. So there's a lot to talk about that. But how did we get here? I don't remember. Something about Moses and Aaron. No. Yeah. So we were talking about, so chet, sin is off the mark, on the mark. The mark is sometimes the physical. Yeah. Okay, good.
Any connection to the fact that Jethro is Cohen?
Cohen Midian, okay, so he's the priest of Midian, right? Yeah, I don't know. Later we're going to see he goes back to his father-in-law and they talk about that. Okay. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, which means we have to make a connection.
That's your homework.
Okay. Okay, we talked about this last week as well, or not last time we met, and this is a very fascinating verse, which is the idea that God says, Aaron, and behold, he is coming forth toward you, and when he sees you, he will rejoice in his heart. Right? This tells us that perhaps one of Moshe's reservations of going because he doesn't want to offend his older brother. And if you read the book of Genesis, you'll understand the jealousy between older brothers and younger brothers, and the younger brother being selected is a lot of the tension in the book of Genesis, and really is the driving force between all the plots in the book of Genesis. And most of them turn out that great. But here is the ultimate transformation. Ultimate transformation is Aaron. Not only will he tolerate his younger brother becoming the leader, like some ways, if you look back at Joseph's two sons already achieved that with the twins, in a way. No, Menashe and Ephraim.
Yeah, but they're not players. I've always said that, okay.
They're not players, but Jacob and Esav and Yaakov are also not players in a way.
But they have speaking parts.
They have speaking parts, but the point is they could have. The younger one was selected, and the other one, the older one, was he upset? Did he want to kill his younger brother? Did he want to kill his younger brother? We don't have a record. They're quiet. They're passive. Okay, yeah, that's a step of not being angry. Here, it's your brother will be happy for you. He will see you. Rejoice for you. That's a big deal.
So
Yeah.
Moses and Aaron haven't seen each other for years and decades.
Correct.
So if Aaron's a slave or in the slavery,
Yeah.
how does he get to take a trip out to?
So that's a good
Connecticut?
question. That's a good question, and it's also the connection appears in other places too. The question appears in other places too, because here Moshe and Aaron are walking in, walking out to the king. Something's happening here. So the commentaries explain that essentially the tribe of Levi was never enslaved. In other words, in Egyptian culture, it was understood that there's going to be a priestly class for every society.
They're not free people.
They're not free people, but in Egypt, they respect the position of the tribes of Levi. So, for example, yeah. So that's the idea. That's the idea.
They have cell phones. How do they communicate?
So that's prophecy, and then Medrash just point out. I saw this morning for the first time that if one guy's leaving from Egypt and one guy's leaving from Midian, and they meet, what's the chance they'll meet at the same point in the desert, right? So it's prophecy. In other words, God tells Aaron to go and tell Moshe to go and meet at the same point, the same place. They each. So that's remarkable. That's part of. But your first point is that Egyptians, you see that also in the book of Genesis, they had the priestly class. The Egyptians had the priestly class, and they respected the priestly class. For example, they come to this country and they said, okay, so houses of worship get a tax exempt. Okay, they say which only okay, here there was separation church and state, but the point is, you understand, if someone believes in the concept, it'll apply to all religions, even the religions they don't believe in. You could see that happening, right? If you respect the concept of a priestly class, so you'll say, okay, the Jewish people have a priestly class as well.
That's America.
I understand, but in a way they were more. The Egyptians were more. What's the word I'm looking for? That's not going to be offensive. Were more not offensive. What's the word I'm looking for? Superstitious. In other words, they believed in multiple gods, and they believed that if this people doesn't serve their God, then the people will be destroyed. What does it help them to have? What does it help them to have slaves if the God is going to wipe out all the slaves? Then there could have been a lot of ways of how they would look at it, which to us would seem surprising, but that would justify. Yeah, the slaves have to worship as well, because otherwise their God will even if it's not our God, their God will. Right? They understood. They understood that they had this idea that of paganism. So there's multiple gods, and every people has their own God, and every people has to serve their God. Otherwise they'll be in trouble. So you want to protect your workforce. You want to let them have a priestly class. For us, you have to believe in freedom for that. But they could have done it out of superstition or paganism. That makes sense. I mean that's the proof of that's what I would say.
So does Aaron have any qualms about becoming now a super leader? And Moses has hundreds of qualms.
No, he doesn't, and that's remarkable. So what does it come from? Either because it's easier to be second in command than first in command. In some ways, no, I'd say no. Or because he's a public servant, and that's why he becomes the priest. Or because he is someone who senses, or because he is someone who senses the pain of slavery. right? Because he is living in Egypt, and he is living in Egypt, and he is sensing the pain, and Moshe, in a way, I don't want to do the job. I'm my own life. I have Midian. I'm married. I have my kids. I have my sheep. I have my own career. Right?
Is this a reflection on the fact that Moses is married to a non-Jew and Aaron is married to a very Jewish woman?
That could be. I would also say, where is he? Moshe doesn't see the pain of the people every day. Aaron is like ready for this to happen. Okay, well, as soon as there's indication that God is going to help the people, he's signing up. Where do I sign up? Right? So Moshe, you're asking him to show up. And that's going to tie into the plot later, because what happens when there's a setback? What happens when a setback? And some people say Moshe's transformation is that when there's a setback, he didn't escape. First time when he hits the Egyptian, when the Jews are fighting, when the Egyptian hits the Jew and he stands up for the Egyptian, and there's a setback, he runs away. That's okay. But you're not a leader if you run. You can't lead the people if you run away. That was more of a general. Moshe, wherever he was, he could not tolerate injustice. Right? That was the pattern of Moshe. So we know that. But the question is, are you leading this specific people? Are you attaching your destiny to these people? And that doesn't happen until there's a setback. When Moshe comes back to God and says, so at this point, before that transformation happens, wherever he is, he doesn't want injustice. If he's in Egypt, he'll stand up to injustice. But if he has to run away, he'll go to Midian. And if there's injustice in Midian, if the shepherds are oppressing the daughters of Jethro, he'll stand up for the daughters of Jethro. Wherever he is, he's going to stand up for injustice. But he's not connected to this specific people. Whereas Aaron, he's with the people, and he sees himself. Also, Moshe says Aaron should have done it because Aaron is the oldest son of Amram. Amram was a Levite. That would be the natural position. In other words, if you asked people, if God was going to redeem the people, who do you think he'll choose? Probably people would say Aaron. You see what I'm saying? So he was connected to the people. He saw the need. Moshe is an outsider. In a way, he's an outsider. It's surprising that the first time around, he saw the Egyptian hitting the Jew and he stuck up for the Jew. And it's not so much because he felt himself as Jewish, even though the Torah does say, Ish Ivri me'achav, a Hebrew person from his brethren. I'm not so convinced that Moshe did it because the guy was a Jew per se, and he saw himself as a Jew. Maybe it was also that Moshe doesn't stand for injustice, but his destiny wasn't connected to these people at that point. But Aaron,
but it's certainly in the Torah that Moses saw the suffering of his brothers, and
yes. But what happens when there's a setback? He runs away. You see that even if you look subtly. I don't want to reopen the whole thing here because it's 10:29. We'll do it maybe next time. But there's two conversations that Moshe speaks. When God speaks to Moshe, there's two stories. One story is the Jews are suffering. I want to save them. That's one story. Another story is I have to keep the promise to the ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's going to be reiterated very strongly in the next parsha in Va'era. What's the difference between the two stories? The first story has nothing to do with the Jewish story per se. Really, you can copy and paste that to any civilization that is being oppressed. Right? People are suffering. God was going to come in and God is going to protect them. And that's the conversation that when God first speaks to Moshe, that's the story he tells Moshe, because that's the story that Moshe responds to. But that doesn't mean I'm connected to this specific people. There's another story, which is there's a family, there's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's a history. We have to bring them back to the land, bring them back into Israel, and you're part of this people. Doesn't have to say that, but if you're part of the promise to the covenant to the ancestors, then you're saying they're your ancestors as well. You have a stake here. And that's a separate story, and that's a separate step in Moshe's evolution of his understanding of what the mission is. And God doesn't tell them both right away. So there's two stories. What I'm trying to say is just because I'm somebody who doesn't like intolerance. So there's many places who doesn't like oppression. There are many places in the world where there's oppression, and you find one cause and try to help them. But if for whatever reason you have to escape this cause, you go somewhere else and you find another cause because they're all the same. Right? There's always oppression, and there's always a place where you can stand up for the oppressed. But then there's a deeper story. The deeper story is, are you connected to these people? And for Moshe, that shift didn't happen yet. And for Aaron, it's natural. He's part of the people. That's also why Bob mentions he builds the golden calf. Why does he build the golden calf? There's all kinds of interpretations. One interpretation is, if the people are sinning, I see myself as part of the people. This is what the people want. I'm part of them. And in a way, that's commendable. In a way. Right? So it depends what the motivation is. But I'm just saying, so it's clear that Aaron is closer to the people and sees himself as part of the people, the leader of them, but part of them. And Moshe, even when he does finally come and he does understand, he's still removed in a way. He's the leader. He's removed. He's not of the people. So I think that ties into why Aaron is very happy to go. I think it's multiple things. I think on one hand, he's a public servant. Obviously, he trusts God. He doesn't have the fear to go to Pharaoh, because later we're going to learn that the elders come with Moshe, but then they drift away. Ultimately, when it comes to the moment of truth, it's Moshe and Aaron. It's only Moshe and Aaron. It's only two people. It's only two people. Where were the elders? The elders were gone. So Aaron, it is. I think it's multiple things, but I still think that there's something about being number two is not as scary as being number one. There's a difference. Ultimately, there's a difference between being the ultimate follower, the ultimate leader, and the follower. You're part of a movement, but you're the first point. You're the first one. There's something to the first one. You know, if you go to the Israel and talk about they're going on the thing, so Entebbe, you have the person who's up front. Okay, and it's very hard to be second, but it's even harder to be first. There's a quantitative difference between second and first, and it's in every area, I think. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I cannot help but thinking about the conclave. And I know you don't watch the movies, but that's where they selected a pope, and there was a lot of power struggle around this thing.
Right.
So when you say first, second, of course, Aaron's role is also very important. I cannot say who's first, who's second. Was he resistant? We spent like 3 months already discussing how Moshe didn't want to take the job, and I was just wondering, for Aaron, it was much easier, was more natural, right?
Right. Yeah, that's what Neil is addressing. He doesn't have any issues. He's happy. He's happy to come and help Moshe. So what's the reason? I don't know. But I'm just thinking. I think it's multiple things. I think it's his devotion, and that's maybe why he gets the priesthood, right? That's what the Medrash is saying. Moshe resists, so he's the ultimate public servant. I think also he sees the pain. He's part of the people, so he sees the need, and he sees he's waiting for this more. He also maybe saw that this is his responsibility of his family. He always expected this to happen. Also, they have the tradition: God is going to redeem you. You know. He's one of the leaders. His father is a leader. He's more of expecting this. It's not a surprise. Also, it's a difference is what is your expectation? It's not a surprise. When God comes to Moshe and says, go to Egypt and redeem the people, it's a shock. When God comes to Aaron is not a shock. He's been groomed for this his whole life. That's what he thought's going to happen. You know, a lot of the problem is Moshe saying, go to the person more natural. Go to Aaron. I don't want to come and take his position. He's the leader. Go to the leader. What do you want from me? So and there's also the element. I still think that he's number two is number three. If you tell me, help me do something, I still think it's easier to be. I think number one is there's a lot more. What do they say? They say leadership they say number one spot is lonely, right? What do they say? There must be
Lonely at the top.
It's lonely at the top. It's lonely at the top. Top is lonely. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. Programming notes, we're going to take another break because we like breaks. We're going to do 4 weeks of the JLI, which is what are colorful profiles. Talks a little bit about famous stories in Jewish history. Not famous, important, but not famous. It's not the famous people, it's the unfamous people, but remarkable stories and the lessons. And so we'll take a 4-week break. We're still here at 9:30. We're learning, we'll have coffee, etc. But hopefully we'll meet in good health, in person and online. Only good things. Have a wonderful day.
Yes,
Thank you.